Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, and welcome back to another video. Today we are covering the Britpop, pre-Britpop section. Now, you might be wondering, Duke, what the heck are you doing? This seems kind of different, and I'm aware. We are covering a chart, like I have done with the Black Ace chart or with the Gusick chart, except this is a little different. It's going to be in a three-part series. The reason is there is a pre-Britpop, a mid-Britpop, or just Britpop, and a post-Britpop section of the chart. And it's so many albums, I'm not going to cover it in one video, just because I have a lot to say about every album. Even if I can't remember everything, I'm going to have something to say usually, because I love to talk to you guys. So what is Britpop? When you think of Britpop, you're probably going to think of Wonderwall by Oasis. But I'm going to be honest with you, there's better Britpop material out there. Blur has a lot of good stuff. I know people that just rave about Blur and will never stop doing that. Also, Definitely Maybe by Oasis. If you want a straight cover-to-cover fantastic album by Oasis, that's my go-to pick. I will be covering it next video though, so I won't get into it that much. Now, right off the bat, I want to say that this little chart here, this section of the chart, has its issues because it's pre-Britpop, but Britpop, it's tough to give it a defining date of when it started, but it definitively pretty much happened in the 90s. Now, the biggest issue here is that two of these albums, the Verve's album and Radiohead's album, happened in the mid-90s after a bunch of Britpop material was already released. So what's the point of calling it pre-Britpop if it's just at the same time? And my theory for that was that it was to get you into the sound, but the inclusion of the Bends by Radiohead doesn't make a lot of sense. So first of all, here's my thing with the Bends, because we're just going to cover it first. I have to disqualify it from this chart. It's not at all like Britpop. It's way more dreary than anything else on this, except for the Stone Roses LP, which I'll get to in a minute. It is a fantastic record. If you like alt rock, you're going to love this album. I will talk for days and days and days about how much I love the Bends. The title track, the Bends, fantastic. The closer is amazing. And I didn't mention this last time I talked about the album, but come on, Fake Plastic Trees, that song is so good. It's a statement about consumerism in a Radiohead song that early, which that didn't seem to be as much a thing yet, but it really was foretelling of the material in OK Computer and even Hail to the Thief. I'm not as big a fan of Hail to the Thief as some people are, but it probably talked about it a little bit. Not that I've delved too deep into it. So that's basically my 2 cents on the Bends. I love the Bends. I've mentioned it in my album rec video of getting into music. If you guys saw that, then you'll probably see more reasons why I like it. But that's really all I want to mention that. So I have to DQ it, but it's a good pick. All right, and one thing I should mention before we get into a few of these other albums, there is something very important in the scene of Britpop that is as pre-Britpop as it gets. It's called Madchester, or acid house. Now, this is basically a combination of house music, especially in the 90s, a little bit reminiscent of Eurobeat, I'm not going to lie. Like What Is Love by Hadaway, you might find tiny little bits and pieces here and there, especially the percussion. It sounds very Eurobeat. There are drums in a lot of it, though, in acid house. So acid house, I would say in a way, it's a little bit like a British version of some of Red Hot Chili Peppers' sort of the end of their early career, like Mother's Milk, Blood Sugar kind of era, where it's definitely funky, super, super funky. And this first album we're going to be talking about here is Screamadelica by Primo Scream, a pretty popular, probably the most popular acid house album I could think of other than Stone Roses' self-titled, but honestly, that album has issues of being called acid house in my opinion. So Screamadelica, it's pretty standard in terms of the genre, but I gotta say, it's great. It was one of my favorite albums on this chart. Now, the first track will be a little bit misleading here because it sounds a little bit like the simplicity of the Strokes, but with the same strength in that simplicity, where it's hard hitting, it's fast, it's consistent, it just works. So if you like that, stay tuned for the hard switch up that comes later. You're going to get longer songs with repetition, especially the Come Together song, which, funnily enough, sounds a little like Spiritualized. A lot of the material on here sounds a bit like Spiritualized, which is funny because Spiritualized have their own song called Come Together, which is in no affiliation to the Beatles track, which is a little weird because the British music never can let go of Beatles. Like, Oasis tried to be the Beatles, and they were huge because of it. So it's a little tough to just distance yourself from that. So I don't know why they named the song Come Together. They could have named it probably something else. But regardless, it's a great song. So yeah, you get hints of Strokes, some hints of Talking Heads, some hits of Red Hot Chili Peppers, some hints of Spiritualized. If you want a combo of all those things with a little bit of Eurobeat, this album is for you. It's a little dated, especially with the Eurobeat influence, but give it a shot. Next we got The Queen is Dead by Smiths. Not an acid house album. I will be returning back to that subject, but I have a hot take about The Queen is Dead. Don't get too mad at me. This is my opinion. I don't think it's that great. I think it's a good album, but I've seen plenty of lists ranking it among top 10, top 20, top 100 albums of all time. I would disagree entirely. I think the songwriting on a good portion of it is up to that quality, but songs like Cemetery Gates, which I understand that's a cute song, that song has a lot of pretentiousness that comes along with it. And it being with the fact that just because Morrissey thinks he's cultured enough to mention all these poets and how, oh, someone said they know poetry, but I knew it too. It's really him being like, I know poetry, and therefore, because of the reference, you should like this song. It's a little along the lines of Lateralis being liked as a song just because it's a Fibonacci sequence. It's a cool idea, but it doesn't inherently make the song better in a way, except that's a cool idea. It sounds more experimental than just mentioning a poet in your song. Not that Cemetery Gates is even a bad song. It's just... And that's a very iconic, like, goth track, especially because of the theme, you know? But I'm digressing a little bit. There are some parts of this album that I like a lot, such as Big Mouth Strikes Again. It definitely resembles a lot of Morrissey today. But yeah, this is a bit of an important album in the pre-Britpop scene because it sort of did the transition of new wave with synths to more guitar-led, which, if you listen to Oasis, you know it's very, very guitar-led. Like, a lot of iconic riffs are done there. You know, Noel Gallagher wrote that stuff really, really well. So yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't get all the hype behind Queen is Dead. Maybe if I listened to Meat is Murder, I would have a higher opinion of the Smiths. I think in some cases it's either the emotional depth or the songwriting or maybe the instrumentation is a little weak. The instrumentation's usually pretty strong, but I was just never quite grabbed that hard. I gotta say though, the most famous track on here, There's a Light That Will Never Go Out, it does kind of echo hints of almost like shoo level emotional depth, where it reminds me of the Gorilla Pony Commander. I forget the name of the song, but it's the opening track off of Promise. And while it's not like as dark as that song, it just gives little hints here and there. So if that's something you like, then listen to this. My main issue with this album is that the Smiths are very entry-level moody music, where if you listen to something like Death Consciousness, that will wreck you if you think this album is very, very sad. It's not positive much, and there are some good parts where he talks about his own flaws, Morrissey, I mean, but it just doesn't quite hit those depths the whole time. It acts self-aware about its own flaws, but then it kind of gets lost at some other points. That's my main gripe. Not a bad album, just not worth the hype at the same time. Now on to something I love, A Northern Soul by Verve. Now, if you guys like Oasis, which if you're listening to a Britpop video, there's a good chance you like Oasis, the Verve is for you. Now, this is an album kind of like the Bends, where it was way deep into the Britpop scene, so putting it in pre-Britpop is dumb. But this album is at its strongest when it's like Oasis, but it dives a little bit more into the punk territory and a little bit more into the shoegaze territory. The song This Is Music is super psychedelic. It just keeps you jamming and jamming. A little bit like the acid house scene music, but not quite entirely because it's a little less dance influenced, I guess, but you will totally just be bobbing the whole time. The beginning starts with this epic bass riff in the left and tambourine hits in the right, which if you have good headphones, it's gonna sound really good, and it's just going and going, and then it fills in with this lush instrumentation. Brilliant, fantastic. Definitely give this album a listen. Also, the emotional depth it reaches, it's pretty nice. Now we have an album that's a little tough to pin down in the position of this chart. It is from the late 80s, and I gotta admit, with its production, it is so incredibly clean for something that came out of the new wave scene. It is a new wave album. This is Skylarking by XTC, and it's very interesting. I got a lot of hints of Flaming Lips, but in my opinion, it was a lot better. If you like that same lush sort of wall of sound instrumentation, and you want to see a little bit of influence from, say, Beach Boys, definitely some influence from Beatles, maybe some, honestly, a little bit of Animal Collective. Animal Collective was definitely influenced by this album, and if they weren't, I would be pretty surprised, because if you want that wall of sound stuff that feels good, you're going to like this album. It's a perfect driving album because it's also got energy. And if you want some depth, the last song, Dear God, is entirely about a man talking to God who he doesn't think is real and basically blaming him for all the woes of the world and then saying you can't be real because of this reason. But then the voice kind of switches to a kid voice. And I don't want to spoil the entire meaning because there's a lot of interpretations behind the song. It's a very interesting and well-written song, and I don't ever hear it mentioned. So check that song out if you just want to check out a single Dear God. It's a very good song. But the album as a whole, I found great. There's a song called That's Really Super Supergirl. That's where like half the Animal Collective ideas in my head came from, where it's quirky, a little like Devo. I don't want to say quirky like I'm some sort of Redditor. Get that out of here. But the songs, it's kind of weird, but it's fun and it's thick, it's dense. I like it. Also, I didn't mention this yet, but it's kind of a concept album about the passage of time and changing. It does seem kind of seasonal. At the beginning, it's got a song called Grass, which is about doing stuff in grass. I don't know if it's too much innuendos there. The album is called Skylarking, which does mean fooling around in some circumstances. Apparently literally fooling around, but I think all you guys know what fooling around might imply. So anyway, Grass, it kind of represents spring, and you see it kind of turns into summer by the end of the album, but there are hints of winter here and there with like the depth of emotion. Also, on this album, no two songs are alike. So, great intro album. Honestly, I would have put this probably in my albums to get into chart if I had found it by then. Back onto the acid house scene, we have an album by Happy Mondays. This is Pills and Thrills and Bellyaches. I don't know why there's an and then and. It's just to be cool. Now, if you liked Screamadelica, but you wanted more, if you wanted it raunchier, if you wanted way more emotional depth, if you wanted vocals to not be as good, this is the album for you. This album is Blood Sugar Sex Magik for the British scene. With the first track on this album, I thought that the guitars sounded amazing, but the percussion was very Manchester. It was very 90s, super dated. Honestly, I'm just going to get this out of the way. The biggest flaw about this album is how dated it is. You listening to it in front of your friends today, they'll probably call you out for calling it a guilty pleasure or something like that, but it's hype the whole time, and I think it's a little deep too. There's a song called Kinky Afro, which definitely has some soul influence that is kind of similar to Screamadelica if you listen to that album at this point. But it had this acoustic guitar twinkling above this almost Kevin Shields like just super dense shoegazy just like strumming in the background. Really, really interesting combination. I gotta give him props for that. I could go on and on about how interesting this album is, and you know what? I might even feel like reviewing this album itself one day, but that is to be determined. So yeah, it's highly dated though, so I'd have to say it's good and not great, but it's a good listen. And now, if you wanted something that was aged well, we finally reached the Stone Roses self-titled. My favorite album on the pre-list, except for The Bends by Radiohead, but I talked about that before, so I didn't really feel the need to talk about it as much now. Anyways, Stone Roses self-titled, released in 1990. This is probably the album you need to listen to if you want to get into the Britpop sound. In fact, I'd say this album, in ways, is better than stuff like Definitely Maybe or some of Blur's material. If you want something with an extreme emotional depth, sometimes he sounds like a broken man. Sometimes he sounds so prideful that nothing's going to stop him just out of spite. The Acid House influences on this album are a little more sparse. If you didn't like the percussion as much, good for you. This album is definitely for you. If you want Screamadelica, but a little bit more consistent in style and not much drum machine, this is what you're going to look for. The song Don't Stop has reversed guitar on it. It's incredible. It reaches shoegazy points on this album. Some parts of the album are way more meditative and super depressing. Basically, I love this album. I absolutely have to recommend this one over probably anything else on this list. If you want to listen to Oasis and Blur and all those groups, listen to the Stone Roses LP first and then get into all those. So, what am I thinking of the charts so far? It's good, but it's not as great as I would like. I think that the only reason they had 7 albums here was match up with the 7 albums on the post list, but really it doesn't matter to me. I think if it's just comprehensive, then it works. You really could have cut maybe 2 of these albums. I felt like the Skylarking album wasn't even necessary. It didn't seem Like that's like more like proto Smiths. But then the influences on it seem kind of lost for the Manchester scene, despite its psychedelic side. Where one thing with XTC is that it was very dense and not super down on oneself, where a lot of the Manchester scene like acknowledges their own flaws in a way. Anyway, so this is a decent chart so far. It's not amazing. I have to DQ a couple albums. I'll show the full chart by the end of the series, by the way, in about 2-ish weeks. But a couple of these albums are totally worth your time. Anyway, that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed, please like and subscribe. It's a red button down there. It is completely free if you click on it, and you'll be able to see my videos if you click on your subscriptions tab. Also, if you want to hit that bell icon, go ahead. You'll get notified every time. Also, if you follow my Instagram and Twitter below, I will shout out when my videos are posted, so you'll see there. Also, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and DM me. I will answer. Anyway, I cannot wait to see you guys next time, and I hope you guys have a good day.